Well, hello, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to join you this way and to be part of a number of people joining in this filming to commemorate and leave notice of the great work that Governor Joe Brennan did during his time as not only Attorney General, state legislator, but governor, and most importantly, governor of the state of Maine. I had both the very special privilege and honor to work with and for Governor Brennan during his time in Maine. And as I reflect back on it now, it was through the 1980s. He served 2 terms as governor of the state, but even before he became governor, he set in motion a number of foundational works that still impact the lives of Maine people. In particular, he was the sponsor of major state legislation during his Senate time, creating opportunity in the social services in the state. Maine's a state with a significant number of senior citizens, still unfortunately with a significant number of very low-income folks, and he authored a major piece of social service legislation that, again, helped enable communities across the state, not-for-profit organizations, to really take advantage appropriately of additional federal and state funding to respond to people, senior citizens, Meals on Wheels, support for people to be able to stay in their own homes, child care for young children, a variety of other efforts. Now, I came to work with Governor Brennan even before he became governor, when he was serving as the state's attorney general, and he was a critical decision maker and provided special counsel to then Governor Jim Longley when the Pineland Center federal lawsuit was filed. Pineland Center had been there since the turn of the century. Like many such state institutions across the country, it had fallen behind both in terms of resources, but also in terms of getting adequately staffed and resourced so that it could fully meet the needs of, in that case, developmentally disabled individuals who were cared for there. Unlike most states at the time, Joseph Brennan, as the Attorney General, recommended to Governor Longley that the state settle the suit by fixing the problems rather than litigating it year after year after year. And subsequently, I recall Governor Longley, when I was the director of the Bureau of Mental Retardation, saying, Governor Brennan, or Attorney General Brennan, I rely upon him and his staff for these recommendations around both responding, not wasting money on litigation, but rather putting resources into the lives of people. Well, when you step back and look at what happened in Maine in the 80s and beyond, because of the work that was done in the late 70s through the 80s, particularly for people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, it's really an era of civil rights change. Many people living through the period may have thought of it as a period of need for services and resources. Yes, it was that, but it really was a period of profound civil rights change for people with disabilities. And I credit Governor Brennan for being the most prominent person leading that. Certainly Governor Longley helped, but it was more fully executed during the 1980s. Governor Brennan, one, supported as Attorney General, the resolution of the so-called Pineland suit, but more than the legalisms, he supported putting the resources into the lives of people cared for in the state institutions, but also creating a network of community-based services that still exist across Maine but were started during that period. So I think back to, Maine. We had a housing law passed in Maine that supported community group homes in residential neighborhoods before there was federal housing legislation supporting such. So we're ahead in that regard. These were matters that were not without contention, but the governor had the solid values and the character to say we should do the right thing here. So I'm very proud of that fact. Also, during his time, Maine enacted something called the Intermediate Care Facilities for people with mental retardation, ICFMR as it's known internally in the Medicaid world. And that Medicaid provision, broadly speaking, has been the foundation of, again, agencies up and down the state of Maine that provide support now. Here's the happy news as you look in 2014 and beyond, that a family with a child with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, serious ones, no longer need worry about, gee, my child will need to go off to a public or a distant institution. That person, as a young person and as an adult, is much more likely to be educated in the local community, to be supported as his or her formal education ends by community agencies, and to enjoy the range of community living that the rest of us have been so fortunate to enjoy in our lives. And Maine is a leader in that regard, and again, that foundation was built during Governor Brennan's tenure. Now also, I had the opportunity, I served for 7 years as a department head, as commissioner for the governor, and I appreciate the fact that he had confidence in me. My first 2 years, I was the commissioner of the Department of Mental Health and Corrections, and immediately the day the governor talked to me about his interest in appointing me or nominating me for that position, he shared with me a very important confidential report on the Maine State Prison that required me, to catch up with his concerns and the work being done by Commissioner Stilfen, the Public Safety Commissioner, readying for change at the Maine State Prison. We did so successfully without anybody being harmed physically, and we restored order basically to a prison that had been neglected in terms of resources and personnel. And it's the kind of thing you don't get much public acknowledgement for, but Governor Brennan, wanted to make sure that Maine met its responsibility both to the public at large, but also to the inmates and the staff in the correctional system. We were the first state in the country to accept from the federal government a military base that was being surplused basically by the Air Force up in Charleston, Maine, and I worked on that. The governor worked on that. It was first in the country. I remember coming down here to the Pentagon as part of the transfer of ownership, and it has served as a minimum security prison as part of the Maine State correctional system ever since, plus providing jobs up in a part of Maine where jobs aren't so frequent as they are in some of the more populous areas. So that's another example, a quiet example of a leadership role that we played, being the first in the nation to accept, develop, and pursue such an opportunity. Our psychiatric hospitals, another area of responsibility. During the Brennan administration, we had all of the psychiatric hospitals in the state fully accredited by the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals. That was a first. We also, during that time, received the Gold Award from the American Psychiatric Association for the Augusta Mental Health Institute, citing it at that time as the best publicly operated psychiatric hospital in the country. I know from having overseen institutions, not only in Maine, but in Iowa and Oregon, they can change if you don't pay attention. then they can lose ground. And I'm pleased to say that during the administration of the Brennan administration, we paid attention. We were responsible stewards and of the state institutions, and it showed. Now, I might say, as I think back on that time, a practice that developed with Governor Brennan was a series of holiday visits around Christmas time, where we would start up in the Bangor area, and I think once we even started in Presque Isle, but mostly would start in Bangor. We'd go from Bangor to Augusta, to Pownell, to Pineland, and then end up at the main youth center, both visiting as a holiday visit where the governor would say hello to the residents, the patients, and wish them holiday good spirits, but also would thank the staff who cared for them. That was really important to do because often our public institutions, those facilities, they don't get the kind of public attention unless they're in the middle of a scandal or a problem. And for us, I know it was a highlight of the year for staff and residents to have the governor come by. He would see firsthand these situations, these centers in operation. And I might say on a private note, I certainly appreciated the fact that he came along on those visits, or he was the lead on those visits, because during his administration, between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, typically he and his immediate staff would be making final decisions about budget recommendations. And it really helped to point out that when we talk about the Bangor Mental Health Institute or Pineland Center or the Maine Youth Center, having been there just a matter of days before that, left an important visual image of what we were talking about in terms of institutions. We had some really interesting and very humorous exchanges in some of those visits that I know showed the humanity of people that we dealt with across the state. And the governor was always of good cheer to sort of be open to that. I think he really personally enjoyed that as well. But it was a great example of his accessibility for people who otherwise were just very average Maine people. They didn't have any particular powerful influences, but they were very much a fabric of Maine. So great things during his years were achieved. Many of them continue to this very day in supporting a quality life for Maine people. And we certainly appreciate, admire Governor Brennan's leadership.